I can still remember that clearly, the day I was abducted.
Child soldiers. Thousands of childhoods were stolen in Uganda. In 1986, the Lord's Resistance Movement kidnapped and manipulated children to be used in their army. This resulted in much psychological trauma and issues for these children later on in life. This is Shifa Sayed with another monthly podcast on the child soldiers in Uganda. The UN, under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, prohibits compulsory recruitment by government forces of anyone under 18 years of age. Despite this, the Lord's Resistance Movement, or the LRA, in Uganda had an army majorly consisting of child soldiers. Children are excellent soldiers as they are trusting, vulnerable, intimidated, and easily manipulated. They can greatly add to confusion on battlefields, slowing opposing forces' progress. Children have also been used as scouts, messengers, minesweepers, bomb makers, suicide bombers, and as advanced troops in ambush attacks. Lack of education is a main factor in children going to join the army, as they are left with few alternatives and can be more easily swayed to join the armed forces. They may also do so because of poverty, revenge, manipulation, abduction, or to secure daily food and survival.
Sarah Amolo was 16 when she was kidnapped and forced into service by the rebels.
They divided work among the groups. Groups for killing people is there, group for beating people is there, group for burning houses is there, and other group for abducting children also is there.
The emergence of the LRA rebel group, initially called the Holy Spirit Movement, is one of the major attributes of Uganda's instability. This organization is known as one of the world's most brutal and inhumane terrorist organizations. In 1986, the rebel group Uganda's People's Democratic Army, or the UPDA, overthrew the Uganda government. Soon after, the Uganda National Liberation Army retook control and many members from the UPDA dispersed. The Holy Spirit Movement Army was formed by Alice Oma, who regathered soldiers from this movement. They were later named the Lord's Resistance Army. The LRA gained a reputation for brutality as it waged an armed rebellion seeking to remove the government of Yoweri Museveni, the Ugandan president, and rule the country on the biblical Ten Commandments. When the LRA started to lose significant regional support and resources, they resorted to a series of lethal rebellious actions that included stealing supplies and abducting children to serve as soldiers. The abductions came to mark the beginning of child soldiers in Uganda in 1994. Following this strategy shift, the LRA became made up mostly of child soldiers. Both boys and girls are involved as child soldiers, and both often experience psychological and developmental issues as a result. Reports of children being involuntarily drugged before sent out to fight, committing atrocities against their own families, executions, death squad killings, torture, detention, and rape are all reported by accounts of child soldiers.
I can still remember that clearly, the day I was abducted.
Ricky Richard Anwar was 14 when he was abducted alongside his older brother.
These people rounded up our family members and set them ablaze. While we are watching, they closed the door and they set the fire ablaze while they were asking for mercy. It was the darkest moment in my life.
Horrific as that sounds, it was far from the most brutal incidents.
This is one of the saddest massacres in northern Uganda, where people were cooked in the pot and
Cooked in a pot?
Yeah. When we had the bomb,
Anwar was among a lucky few who managed to escape, returning to his native town of Pader. He then learned that his brother had escaped a year earlier, only to commit suicide soon after doing so.
Escapees from the LRA need extensive help to recover from the physical and emotional trauma of war. In many cases, those who escape from the LRA also need practical help to trace and be reunited with their families and communities across northern Uganda. Many centers in Uganda provide psychological support to returnees of the LRA conflict. An essential function of these centers is to reunite and follow up with the families during the joyful but challenging return home of former abductees. Moving forward, part of this process will ensure that returnees, their families, and communities have access to education and economic development programs such as village savings, loans associations, and functional adult literacy.
Michael Anwar was just 13 when the rebels took him.
I was abducted with my brother, and they told me I had to kill my brother and other people. If I didn't, I would be killed. They also told me to give them some money, but I didn't have money, so I was forced to kill my own brother. My own brother.
Christine Oroma is one of the counselors.
The child could have been abducted when he was 9 years old, but now here he's coming back home when he's 25 or 30, meaning that most of the time, most of his lifetime is spent in captivity. So we see that really they have challenges in coping up with life in the community.
Oroma holds group and individual sessions and art therapy to get the former soldiers to work through their feelings. Studies on child soldiers in Uganda who return from the battlefield show they have a wide range of problems like post-traumatic stress and depression. One of the first steps for the former soldiers is to get them to forgive themselves for what they've done.
I have apologized to myself for having participated in doing the wrong thing.
But Christopher Oyat says he's still in the process of apologizing to the people in his community for the crimes he committed. Oroma says even when the soldiers have made progress during the therapy sessions, returning to their villages can still be difficult.
Not everybody in the community has already forgiven them, the rebels. The others who are still very bitter with the rebels, even those who have already returned back into the community, there are other community members who are still bitter with them because they see that now my child is not back, and for you, you are back at home. My child died from captivity, and now for you, you are still back at home.
The LRA is a shadow of what it used to be after being pushed out of the country following a major expedition in the mid-2000s. Governmental and non-governmental international forces, such as the US, played an important role in creating global awareness of the destruction and inhumane methods of this group. In October 2011, US President Barack Obama sent around 100 Special Forces soldiers to back the Ugandan army hunt for the Lord's Resistance Army and its leader, Joseph Kony. The American forces provided advisory, intelligence, and logistical support, transporting Ugandan troops to the remote regions of Central Africa where the rebels had been spotted. In June 2018, there have been no reported fatalities or abductions, meaning that there are no new child soldiers in Uganda this year. The growing peace in Uganda gave hope that the country's poverty rate might reduce and that the LRA would not reign indefinitely. Sure enough, According to the World Bank's 2016 Uganda Poverty Assessment, the percentage of Ugandans under the national poverty line dropped from 31.1% in 2006 to 19.7% in 2013. While things are looking much better in Uganda, today many countries still use child soldiers, including Afghanistan, Central Africa, Sierra Leone, Republic of Congo, Iraq, Myanmar, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. To end the usage of child soldiers, there needs to be a close monitoring and reporting of states' compliance with the UNICEF Optional Protocol on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict. There also needs to be political leadership and focus on children during and after conflict as well. The Optional Protocol highlights a few key issues with the current support programs in Uganda. This includes insufficient funding towards programming, limited quality program with no long-term intervention, and a lack of community-led programs towards the root of child soldier recruitment and prevention. As a Canadian, I was interested as to what Canada, my nation, was doing towards solving this problem. Historically, Canada has had as many as 700,000 soldiers under the age of 21 serving in uniform during the Second World War. Today, the Canadian government is a firm advocate for this issue and is the first nation to issue guidelines for dealing with child soldiers to their army. The guidelines are intended to ensure Canadian troops are properly trained and emotionally prepared for situations involving child soldiers, including where they may have to shoot and kill. On February 12, 2019, the International Day Against the Use of Child Soldiers, the Government of Canada released a statement from the Prime Minister regarding Canada's position on child soldiers. In the statement, the government reiterated Canada's commitment to protecting children from the quote-unquote heinous practice of being used in armed conflict. Today, the illegal usage of child soldiers is still a practice among many countries around the world. Without the advocacy of social justice groups, organizations, government, and myself and you, the listener, this issue will still remain. We need to educate the public about this horrific issue and ensure that nations follow the UNICEF Optional Protocol on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict. Only then will thousands of children finally get their childhood back. This is Shifa Saeed, and you are listening to Child Soldiers in Uganda podcast.